Hi everyone. Today there will be two stories. The first one revolves around a port city where nighttime observations begin to contradict its familiar layout, raising questions about how stable a place can really be. The second story focuses on a long-distance sea captain and a voyage that left unusual gaps in records, logs, and personal recollections, without offering any clear explanation. This video is meant for calm, immersive listening, a chance to slow down, relax, and quietly think about how much of reality may remain unrecorded or overlooked. The shadow of old San Francisco. The cargo ship Astera had been undergoing repairs at a remote pier in the port of San Francisco for nearly 3 weeks. During the day, welding sparks filled the deck with harsh flashes of light, and at night, the ship turned into a massive dark shell from which sailors would slip ashore just to breathe the city. Captain Michael Harris pretended not to notice these nighttime walks. As long as everyone showed up in the morning and could still hold a wrench, he let it slide. The first to mention something strange was the engine mechanic, Daniel Walker. Quietly, almost embarrassed, he told the boatswain that the night before he had walked toward downtown and somehow failed to find familiar streets. He said he followed what should have been Market Street, but the buildings looked wrong. Low, narrow, with wooden balconies, like something from old photographs. He swore he saw a sign reading Ocean Theater, even though a shopping complex had occupied that spot for years. When two others joined the conversation, helmsman Ryan Porter and deckhand Alex Kim, it turned out each of them had experienced something similar. They described empty nighttime blocks without cars or people, dim streetlights, and a strange sense that their footsteps echoed too softly, as if swallowed by heavy air. All three insisted the street names were familiar, but the layout felt like a distorted reflection of the city. In the morning, they showed the captain photos on their phones. Instead of clear images, there were smeared streaks of light, vague silhouettes of buildings, and deep black gaps, as if the camera had captured smoke rather than streets. Only one photo showed a recognizable facade with empty window openings and scorched decorative stonework, though none of them remembered any major fires downtown. Captain Harris waved it off, muttering about night stories, and ordered them not to wander far after dark. On the third night, when thick fog settled over the bay, Walker, Porter, and Kim decided to check whether they were losing their grip on reality. They deliberately avoided alcohol, set alarms on their phones, and mapped out a route in advance. From the shipyard, across the overpass, toward familiar streets with cafes and all-night stores. At first, everything matched. The same security booth, the same wide road crossing, the same advertising signs. But the farther they walked from the port, the stranger the surroundings became. Traffic noise faded, storefronts disappeared, and glass facades gave way to dark, 3-story buildings with narrow windows. Signs looked faded, the lettering old-fashioned, and the streetlights cast a yellow, trembling glow. The street signs stubbornly displayed familiar names: Market Street, Mission, Van Ness. But the streets themselves were different, narrower, squeezed between buildings, with uneven sidewalks and rusted railings. Some entrances were sealed shut with wooden boards, and above one doorway hung a sign reading Emergency Exit, as if left over from wartime drills. What unsettled them most was the silence. No dogs barking, no music from passing cars, not even the sound of their own footsteps for more than a second. When they reached an intersection not listed on any navigation app, where 4 identical buildings faced each other with empty windows, A long, drawn-out horn echoed in the distance. It was not a car horn, but something older, like those heard in archival footage. For a moment, it reminded them of an air raid siren, though no loudspeakers were visible. Walker nervously checked his watch. The hands had not moved the entire time, even though it felt like they had been walking for at least an hour. Panicked, they turned back, choosing any direction where modern cars or plastic windows appeared. When they finally reached the docks, one of the technicians looked at them in surprise and asked where they had been. It was already 5 in the morning. According to their watches, barely 2 hours had passed. Captain Harris called a meeting that morning. The sailors spoke awkwardly about another San Francisco, about old buildings and silence, about a siren that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. Harris scolded them for breaking discipline, but he himself looked uneasy. For weeks, rumors had circulated in the port that another crew had complained about strange nighttime streets that did not exist during the day. The conversation was overheard by a Port Authority employee named Dennis Reed, a young traffic safety inspector. He had always been interested in urban legends and welcomed any excuse to escape routine paperwork. With the captain's permission, he brought the sailors into a small office near the docks and recorded their statements one by one. Dennis asked each man to draw the route from memory, marking turns, stairways, arches, and any detail they could recall. The sketches differed in specifics, but matched in structure. Narrow blocks above the port, several dead ends, a courtyard with a wrought iron staircase, and an archway with a faded sign. Each account repeated the same phrases: the feeling of a hollow stage set, and streetlights glowing as if through smoke. When Dennis asked to see the photos, the sailors exchanged uneasy glances. On his tablet appeared the same blurry panoramas, dark building shapes, smeared light trails, and patches resembling flame bursts. The camera seemed incapable of capturing clear lines. Only one image, taken by Porter, revealed through digital noise a facade with burned walls, hollow windows, and the shadow of a poster with barely legible letters reading "Evacuation." Dennis did not rush to blame fatigue or alcohol. His own family had once spoken of how parts of San Francisco burned during the war years, how entire neighborhoods near the bay were altered almost overnight. The more he listened, the stronger one thought grew inside him. They had not wandered into a bad neighborhood, but into a city that no longer existed on modern maps. The following night, despite the captain's orders, Dennis walked the described route himself. He brought a spare phone, a service radio, and a small environmental sensor, not for radiation, but to track any changes at all. He followed the same path, through the industrial gate, under the overpass, along a familiar road toward the rising streets. At first, the city behaved normally. Storefronts glowed, cars hissed across wet pavement. Music drifted from an open cafe window. Then, about 20 minutes in, everything fell unnaturally quiet. Music cut off mid-note. Bright signs were replaced by old ones with peeling paint. A modern grocery became a sign reading "Provisions open under all conditions." Dennis felt resistance beneath his feet. The pavement grew rougher, stone slabs emerging through the asphalt. Streetlights no longer shone steadily. Their light trembled as if thick air hung between them and the ground. Turning a corner, he saw a narrow courtyard with a wrought iron staircase and the same arch described by the sailors. Above it hung a poster with half-erased letters, "Assembly Point." From far away came the same drawn-out signal, not a modern emergency siren, but a heavy mechanical horn, as if operated by hand. Then came broken commands, as though shouted through a megaphone. First column to the school. Children first. Do not stop. The words sounded distant, muffled, but unmistakably clear. At that moment, his phone showed the time frozen for nearly 15 minutes. The sensor on his belt chirped and spiked erratically. Dennis felt the hair on his arms rise, along with a sensation of being watched, as if dozens of unseen eyes followed him from dark windows. Without thinking, he turned and hurried toward where modern streets and port lights should be. The next morning, exhausted and shaken, Dennis went not to work, but to the city archives. He asked the senior archivist for wartime documents, civil defense plans, shelter maps, evacuation routes. Surprised but convinced by his credentials, the archivist led him to cabinets of faded folders. Among them, Dennis found a thick plan labeled Evacuation Scheme for Districts 12 through 16 during Air Raid, 1942. Black lines showed neighborhoods above the bay, with red routes marking evacuation columns. He instantly recognized the street curves. The names matched what the sailors had seen at night, but the buildings were low and tightly packed, with narrow passages between them. Certain courtyards were marked as danger points, with notes warning of bottlenecks. One of them was the same dead end with the wrought iron staircase, penciled in with the words, "Part of the population failed to evacuate." Below, a large red shaded area read, "Dense development destroyed by fire. Reconstruction not planned." Comparing this with a modern map, Dennis saw that wide roads, high rises, and a shopping complex now occupied the same ground. The place buzzing with life by day was the same area where he and the sailors had crossed into another version of the city at night. It seemed that the burned San Francisco of the war years somehow persisted in a separate layer, overlapping the present during foggy nights. The archivist mentioned, almost casually, that these documents had once been stored separately and later marked for destruction 75 years after the war. Only a few years remained. Back at the port, Dennis overlaid the evacuation plan onto a satellite image. The match was nearly exact. Modern streets followed the old lines, but buildings stood differently, courtyards were gone, and passageways sealed. Where the archive showed houses destroyed by fire, sailors had reported empty facades and boarded entrances. He filed an internal report, cautiously noting indications of anomalous perception of urban space consistent with pre-war district layouts. One supervisor skimmed it and muttered that repairs were behind schedule. The sailors reacted in different ways. Walker admitted he no longer wanted to leave the ship at night. Porter joked about it, but always quickened his pace after sunset. Only Kim remained silent, staring toward the shore as if waiting for the city itself to extend its streets toward the vessel. A week later, Astera departed, and the story of the night city faded into routine. In the port, it survived only as half-joking tales about sailors who wandered into 1942, and a short note in Dennis's notebook. Sometimes, returning home late, Dennis deliberately walked those same streets. Neon reflected in puddles, cafes stayed open, scooters buzzed past. But when fog dropped low and the wind died, it sometimes felt as though the buildings grew heavier, darker, lower, and the streetlights turned yellow, like lamps in gas mask workshops. In those moments, he imagined columns once again moving through those same streets toward assembly points. This story ends without revelation or investigation, but with quiet understanding. The San Francisco known to tourists and residents lives its ordinary life of traffic, construction, and lights over the bay. Yet somewhere beneath it, in layers of memory and old plans, another city continues to exist. one that never fully evacuated and remains trapped in an endless night with its siren. And on rare foggy nights, a few people who turn the wrong way manage to walk its streets and return, carrying only blurred photos and the sense that the true horror is not monsters, but a city that refuses to let go of its past. The edge of the sea log. The apartment of deep-sea captain Thomas Hale stood in an old hillside building overlooking San Diego Bay. From its windows, the gray surface of the harbor stretched out below, lined with cranes and anchored vessels. It was a view Hale had lived with for most of his life. He died quietly in winter from heart failure. Neighbors noticed something was wrong when cold air continued to seep from beneath his door for several days, and the television inside never turned on. His nephew, Daniel Hale, was called to handle the estate. He drove in from the outskirts of the city, where he worked at an auto repair shop, to sort through the belongings of a man who had always felt more like a distant legend than a relative. As Daniel moved through the apartment, he pulled worn peacoats from the closet, unfolded yellowed nautical charts marked with thick route lines, and stacked ship logs filled with precise dates and signatures. Behind a row of neatly folded shirts, he found a flat bundle wrapped in canvas. Inside was a personal diary, written from the first page to the last in tight, disciplined handwriting. Flipping through the diary by the window, with the low mechanical hum of the port drifting up from below, Daniel noticed something unsettling. The entries ran steadily until 1972, filled with routine notes about crews, weather, and ports of call. Then came a single page with one sentence written in the center of otherwise empty paper, crossing beyond the edge of the map. After that, the diary resumed in 1983, as if the 10 years between those dates had never existed. No crossed-out pages, no torn sections, just absence. Between those pages lay an old seaman's credential issued in 1976, bearing Thomas Hale's name and listing a military port. A quick check through public records showed that the port had been fully restricted to civilian vessels during that period. Daniel felt a chill settle in his stomach. As a child, he remembered the missing years, when his uncle had quietly disappeared from family conversations. Back then, adults had brushed it off with vague explanations about long assignments. Daniel brought the diary and the credential to a man Hale had once referred to as "my first officer." Now retired, Richard Collins worked as a senior operations manager at the port. Gray-haired but solid, Collins recognized the canvas cover before opening the diary. Hale had always kept it close and never allowed anyone to touch it. When Collins reached the gap in the entries, his expression tightened. He remembered how Hale had simply vanished from professional life after the early 70s, only to return years later without explanation, reassigned as if nothing unusual had happened. Personnel records showed the same gap. Up to 1972, Hale's career followed a normal progression. Then came a sterile line, under departmental assignment, with no department named. In 1983, he reappeared as captain of a civilian cargo vessel. Old rumors resurfaced in quiet conversations around the port. Some claimed Hale had been temporarily reassigned to Navy operations. Others spoke of sailing under different registries or taking part in routes that never appeared on official charts. Everyone agreed on one thing. When he returned, he was quieter, heavier in his gaze, uncomfortable in crowds, and prone to waking from restless sleep. The diary felt like a chance to understand what had been deliberately left unspoken. A maritime historian, Dr. Samuel Whitaker, agreed to examine the material. He was accustomed to legends and inconsistencies, but Hale's diary immediately stood out. The early years read like a textbook. Storms, engine failures, port delays, routine calculations. The language was grounded and practical, but in the early 70s, the tone shifted. Notes appeared about adjustments ordered from above, about coordinates missing from standard charts, and about briefings where civilian captains were instructed not to question assigned routes. One entry from late 1972 disturbed Whitaker the most. Hale described a closed meeting where several captains were shown a large map with a rectangular section blacked out in open ocean. Inside the rectangle were no depth readings or seabed contours, only a small cross and a penciled note. Test area. Hale wrote that he disliked seeing the ocean treated like a laboratory, and that for the first time he felt less like a master of his ship and more like a piece on someone else's board. The final dated line before the blank pages read, "Tomorrow we sail on a new route. If we return, I will write everything. If not, let this be the mark. Crossing beyond the edge of the map." Archive requests confirmed what the credentials suggested. During the mid-70s, the listed port was under full military control. Civilian access was prohibited. Yet in a restricted logbook from 1977, Whitaker found a troubling entry. Hale's former vessel docked at that very port. In the column marked Captain, the name read Hale T. The signature matched the diary exactly. The next page of the log had been neatly replaced, citing damage to the original record. Former crew members were eventually located. The boatswain, Jack Mercer, and the radio operator, Paul Reynolds, both long retired, spoke cautiously at first. After learning of Hale's death, they began to talk more freely, as if an old internal restraint had finally loosened. They recalled unusually heavy equipment loaded at night, unmarked crates, and cylindrical instruments bolted along the hull. Navigation behaved oddly. Compasses drifted. Clocks aboard the ship began to disagree by minutes. The radio picked up brief, fragmentary signals unlike any known code. Approaching the restricted zone, they remembered the sea becoming unnaturally smooth and heavy, almost oily. The sky darkened without clouds. Stars hung too low and in unfamiliar positions, as if the sky itself had been subtly misaligned. Mercer admitted he had never seen fear in Hale's eyes before that moment. The captain had gripped the railing and whispered about coordinates that do not exist, then ordered the crew to hold formation and avoid staring at the horizon for too long. Two explanations emerged. One was official and safe, a classified program involving navigation systems or signal testing. The silence, the missing years, and the altered records could be explained by security clearances and fear of disclosure. The other explanation was harder to dismiss. When the ship returned to normal waters, crew members recalled all clocks snapping back into alignment at once, followed by headaches and disturbed sleep that lasted for months. For those aboard, it had been a single voyage. For the outside world, more time had passed than they were prepared to accept. That difference seemed to settle over Hale's life like a quiet, permanent weight. In the final pages of the diary, after years of ordinary entries, one sentence appeared in the margin, written with an unsteady hand. "Everyone has a map. No one has the edge." The date beside it was incomplete, as if even the year had become uncertain. Whitaker closed the diary, listening to the distant noise of the harbor. Whether Thomas Hale had served in a secret program or crossed into a zone where time itself miscounted no longer mattered. The result was the same. He had stepped beyond the edge of the map and returned to live out his life in a reality where an entire decade officially never existed.